Hello and welcome. Welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed and we are reading Plato's Phaedo because we are on a quest to discover the meaning of life. Oh, can we even say there is such a thing? Surely that's blasphemy. Because we are taught in our current culture that there is no meaning of life, or if there is, it's unknowable. Or if it is and it's knowable, it's not knowable to us. Or maybe it's not knowable and we don't even exist to know it. Various different ways that we are taught to not understand the meaning of life and understand what would be involved in achieving the meaning of life and whether or not that meaning of life is universal to all living things and therefore our destiny. Of course, by picking up the quest to know the meaning of life, we are doing something very different, very important, very new, but in one sense very old because we're learning about it from Socrates, who existed over 2,000 years ago. But we're also learning a way of understanding all of those objections. So not only are we learning what the meaning of life is, we're learning to understand what it isn't. How can you reject the meaning of life? We've talked about there not being one, it not being knowable, maybe it's knowable but not to us, maybe we don't even exist. Oh, hang on a second, that's 4 different rejections to the meaning of life. And there are 4 different categories in the dialectic. We are discovering that the logos that we're seeking follows a structure called the dialectic. And if it's a universal paradigm, it's also a way of understanding the meaning of life and the different approaches to the meaning of life. Not just the different stages of reaching it, but the different levels of rejecting it. Because the dialectic has 2 parts, what it is and what it isn't. The ladder to what's true and its shadow. In the Phaedo, which we've been reading, Socrates has been pointing out one is virtue, the other is vice. Notice, vice is not the absence of virtue. You couldn't even say it's the opposite of virtue. In the way that hot is the opposite to cold. It's the shadow. There are many aspects of virtue present in vice. You could say it's the appearance of virtue. To be a good tyrant, you need to have a lot of great qualities. Focus, attention. You can't be pushed here and there by your desires. You need to have a focus on one thing. However, if that one thing isn't the logos, the ladder to the actual meaning of life, you can get really good at doing something which is terrible. That's vice. So we're on a quest to know and reach the meaning of life. And we are also, as part of that quest, learning how do we do that? How do we play that game? How do we reach it? That's philosophy. That's what Socrates has been outlining to us. This is how we should live and how we should die. And, funnily enough, the doctrine of philosophy is the art and practice of dying. So involved in living well is dying well. Of course, before our final death, before we get buried. So, we're learning about that. And therefore, from that, how can we really nail down what exactly philosophy is compared to what it isn't? Because it's as we've been saying, it's one of the most tragically misunderstood things. If philosophy gives us what we need to understand and solve problems, then it's desperately needed in the world. Globally, for humanity, for our planet, but also for each individual person. Everybody doesn't want to suffer, everybody wants to be happier, everybody wants to reach a higher level of excellence, of knowing. Everybody, whether they know it or not, seeks beauty, does what they think is good. So we're all innately philosophers. So you could say one way of defining philosopher is the next stage of our development for all human beings. Back in the day, it was more of an esoteric sort of a thing. because finding the truth challenges our deeply held prejudices. We know that already. Each tyrant goes after the thinkers first. And of course, all prejudices are about those that think differently to you. People who think differently or look differently or speak differently or walk differently. We are taught to fear them and not understand them. That's the nature of ignorance and prejudice. So because of that, it was kept as a more of an esoteric sort of a teaching, meaning it was kept for certain kinds of people. But we don't have time for that anymore because we're on the brink of humanity's destruction. Everybody's going through various crises caused by capitalism and wealth inequality and tyranny of all different sorts, all of which can be understood and solved through philosophy. Big claim, but also true. Might hurt people's feelings to hear that we can solve problems, especially if they've been taught prejudices that tell them you can't solve problems, and we've identified 4. You can't know the meaning of life. Could apply those 4 objections to the meaning of life to objections to solving problems. You can't solve problems. It's unknowable. Or maybe it's knowable but not to humans. Or maybe it's only knowable when we die. Or maybe we don't even exist. Maybe we don't even have consciousness. It's just a byproduct of being a physical being. There's lots of different ways of rejecting destiny or the meaning of life, as there are ways of rejecting the problems that we have, and understanding and solving of problems. Now, interestingly enough, it's the same thing. The dialectic, which is used to reach the meaning of life, is also the method of understanding and solving problems. Last time we were looking at how that must be the case, because if you are seeking to solve problems with the body, you have to first know the healthy body in order to recognize deviations from it. So there is a kind of way of understanding what's true, and also a way of recognizing the deviations from that paradigm. And this is what's important in philosophy. So, because we're not taught this has been buried for 1500 years or more. In place of what? Belief. Our schools, we have professors at the front. That comes from the word professor comes from professing the faith, because priests would get their instructions from some other person who bullshitted his way to the top and claims to be closer to God, and we profess the official teachings of whatever church you grew up in 1500 years ago, and people are told to just believe, blindly believe. Doesn't matter if it's against your interests, we'll trick you. Of course, today we have lots of preachers earning billions of dollars off their sheep by doing the same thing. Not teaching people how to read, not teaching people how to understand, not teaching people how to verify their understanding in their own direct experience and therefore have knowledge. So rejecting knowledge, rejecting understanding, rejecting reading, to instead tell them to believe what they say. And of course, they're abusing their power. Why? Because like all human beings, they have problems. And unless they learn how to read, unless they learn how to understand, unless they learn what knowledge is, they do not have what they need to solve problems. You can't pray away problems. That's insane. Of course, we know that would be insane too. Whoops, gotta plug in my computer. Of course, we recognize that would be insane in terms of the body. Of course, we recognize that would be insane in terms of the body. But there are people who still think that. Christian scientists, they're called. Of course, we don't allow that. Just because you believe something to be good when it's harmful doesn't make it true. Doesn't mean you can do that. We're not all entitled to our own opinions if those opinions we act on. And we do. So if you do not give medicine to your child who is sick because you think you can pray away illness, you will go to prison. Likewise, you can't pray away other human problems. Politicians will tell you that because that gets you to do nothing. Hope. Just hope it changes. Think positively. Of course, without action, without understanding and without steps that you can follow, it's just nonsense. So, likewise, we can apply that same principle to understanding the meaning of life. You can't just make up whatever the heck you want, because that's not necessarily going to be true. In fact, if you reflect on it, you'll probably see it's based on your family's beliefs, which are also reflect a lot of what your culture's beliefs are, which is also reflecting the beliefs of the time period. It doesn't make it true. So what is true? How do we read? How do we understand? How do we gain knowledge about that which is most important? Solving problems and the meaning of life. Destiny. That's why we're here. To awaken philosophy, awaken the greatest quest, the gift that humans have that allow us to overcome ignorance, solve problems, and reach our highest, most meaningful goals. So, part of that process involves, as we've been saying, reading. You have to engage. So, sometimes on this channel, we get people who come on and say, what do you believe about this or that? And I always have the same response. Well, we're not really interested in belief. That means nothing to you. You either already believe it yourself and you'll nod and, yes, that's what I believe. Or you don't believe it and you'll reject it. Nothing changes. Problems are not solved. People do not develop. The two things we're here to do: solve problems, escape the chains of fate, and develop, reach our highest excellence. An excellence that we can take with us into our next incarnations. So I'm not really interested in belief. In fact, the con artists and scammers deal in belief. We talked about preachers, billionaire preachers who scam the believers. We talk about politicians who say just hope for change and never do anything to make changes because they're personally benefiting in the short term. They think what they're doing is good for them. Think of other scammers. Do they deal in belief? Trust us with my NFT. Have belief. Have faith in my cryptocurrency before I pump and dump, scam you. Belief is the realm of scammers because it's nothing. It's not relative to truth. Anyone can believe I've got an uncle who believes all sorts of crazy nonsense. Doesn't make it true. In fact, it doesn't even relate to truth. There's no law that says you have to believe things that are true. How many crazy religions are there in conflict with each other? Thousands. So at least 99.9% of them are wrong. So almost all, if not all, are wrong. But that's incidental because it's still the realm of belief. It doesn't get you anywhere. Of course, the scammer will say all you need is belief. That's great because they don't have to build anything. They don't have to make anything. No overheads. They're selling belief. It's very cheap. And we know capitalism, making money, is making your expenses cheap. Of course, it's also unfalsifiable. Oh, you didn't get salvation? You didn't get that check in the mail that we promised you with our prosperity gospel? You didn't believe hard enough. I'm not interested in belief. In fact, Socrates points out that, hey, what we actually want, all things, even sticks, desire, and have a purpose to remind us of, and that way all physical things are the same. They all reach out to a certain kind of being, and they all have a purpose to remind us of being. So we don't start as philosophers, we start as lovers of learning. Then we recognize the things we learn about require there to be being. Of course, you don't start learning if you're at belief. So if we start as lovers of learning in the physical world, all things point to the reality of being. That's what we seek, and Socrates says it's unopinable. It can't be an object of belief or opinion. So our goal is beyond belief, literally. Not only that, you can't even start the quest if you're told your salvation comes with belief, and that's religion. It might be impolite to say, but fuck that. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't swear. But screw that. It's true. It's important. Children are most people become religion, almost, if not all people. Almost all people join a religion based on their family because they're too young to know better. You could say that's the same with our problems. Before we developed logos, this way of thinking, everything different than my cave is bad and scary, so stay in the cave, stay in the clan, we didn't know better. But as it was a solution to a problem when we didn't know better, kept us alive, it's no longer applicable. So we need to look at our evolutionary cause and nature of our ignorance. The way of thinking of in-group, out-group. My cave good, outside cave bad. And of course, that's what's preyed on by con artists. You're better because you're white, or you're American, or because you're a man, anything like that. Your cave, you are better just because. Likewise, when we were young and didn't know better, we didn't have the grasp of the logos very well yet, we had to believe something, or we thought we had to believe something to survive. So we also have our allegiance to our religion. Doesn't have to be an official religion, can be the unofficial religion of the household. This is our cause of our problems. And it just like how difficult has been and how long it's been for us to overcome the human problem of ignorance from our evolution, so too people become fiercely loyal to their ignorance. My dad was the Superman. He could beat up your dad. My mother was a saint. She was never wrong about anything. So this is the human condition. A fierce loyalty to what's causing our problems. And of course, this is the nature of religion. To be bound by belief is what the word means. Now, of course, you can create confusion by muddying the waters and say, oh no, religion means lots of things to lots of people, but so therefore stop talking. Let's not understand what religion is and allow con artists to con billions. Humans to go to war for religious reasons. Or we can say, no, that's part of the con. To say you're not good enough to know. You can't question the bankers ripping you off because you're too dumb to know economics. For years we were told that. Fortunately, now we have the internet, we're realizing, oh, these people claiming to be smarter and better, the Elon Musks of the world, are idiots. They're not smarter than us, and their language to justify capitalism, the free market, the invisible hand, is nonsense. It's bullshit. It's lies. Muddying the waters to exclude. Thumbs up. So we're getting a list now. Muddying the waters to exclude. Saying that belief is your salvation. Saying there's no way of knowing. These are ways of silencing the mind that we have to overcome. So belief is the cause of our problems. Even if you're not religious, there'll be a belief in the family. And of course, religio means the definition. If we were to dismiss the we're too dumb to understand, we can nail down the definition of religion, which is very simple. It's from the word to be bound, to join, thumbs up. And it's to be bound specifically by a saving belief. That's the definition. And if what we truly seek, being, is beyond belief, is not opinable, then literally believing, thinking we'll get salvation, is just like the poor people voting conservative, voting for the mega rich to get richer, to not pay any tax. Doesn't matter how hard you try, you are actively working against your own best interests. That's why we need to pass laws to ban lying on television. These news networks and politicians just lie. And they cause people to believe against their own interest, and then they act upon their beliefs against their own interest. And they play on that evolutionary problem that we become fiercely loyal to our false beliefs, even if they're false and against their own interests. So the most poor become the biggest advocates for the mega rich. Why? It's exactly the opposite of what benefits you. Because it's the human evolutionary conditions. And it's part of being a human being. You don't get there through belief. You just don't. It's in the text. You get there through reading, which is not believing someone else and their own ignorance. And who's to say how much work they did on their pathologos, on their shadow, and how much far up the ladder is? We don't ask those questions. How far up the ladder of the logos are you towards enlightenment? How much have you seen of your pathologos, your shadow of the logos? That's the cause of your problems. We don't ask those questions. We just believe that the priest knows better. Every now and again, they'll be exposed as being a con artist, but then people forget because we don't have a standard. This is what philosophy provides: a standard, a paradigm. A standard for health of the body is needed for medicine. A standard for health of the mind is needed to understand scammers, understand liars that abuse people, lie to people to get them to act against their own interests. Put an end to this nonsense. Put an end to this corruption and idiocy and genocide and murder and all of the problems that we have. You can't do it without a paradigm. But we have the ability to understand, not believe, understand the paradigm. And the fantastic thing about the understanding of the paradigm, it's verifiable in knowledge. It's a knowable thing. You can literally verify it, making it a spiritual. We are spiritual beings. We have a soul. We're not limited to just our sense perceptions. That's the significance of philosophy and distinguishing it from belief. And hey, all of those things that we've talked about today that get us to act against our own interests, we see them in philosophy. Gatekeeping. Oh, you're too smart. You can't do philosophy unless you're so smart to have read Hegel and Heidegger and Kant and Nietzsche and read all these books. Ain't no one got time for that. So only a very, 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 very small amount of people with the kind of autism, the kind of personality that makes them love reading these books for whatever reason, that are inaccessible. They're not actually reading it because they're interpreting, because they haven't learned to read. As it is. I remember taking Plato at school. We read the Republic. We didn't read the Republic. The exact opposite of the Republic is what I paid money to learn at university. It said specifically, if you read the actual words yourself, you will find the Republic is not about a political state. He specifically says on numerous occasions, it's not about a political state, it's an analogy for the soul. How do they teach it at school? Nothing to do with the soul, only about it being a political state. They don't know how to read. Profess a kind of belief that gets you to dismiss your own understanding, your own seeing. Don't believe your own eyes. So gatekeeping. Also, another thing we'll say, what do you believe about this or that? No, not interested in belief. This is the way philosophy is taught. Here's a bunch of boring, old, dry, dusty works from all these people. You're not given a paradigm of the truth. So what do you do with it? Where do you store it? You can't. You learn to parrot back what you think the teacher wants to hear. You have to have some paradigm. You can't just pour spaghetti into a brain and hope them to remember all of the spaghetti, like alphabet spaghetti. Remember how many A's and B's and C's there were in the alphabet spaghetti. It doesn't work that way. Whether we like it or not, we operate from a paradigm. We have some sort of framework. What are our options? Somehow read every work of these million different texts from these old European academics? We can't. You have to be some sort of freak genius. You have to remember them. You can only remember them if you see some meaning in them. You have to find a framework, a context for remembering them, making sense of them. Now, without being told a paradigm, you really fall onto two choices. You're going to make sense of it based on what you already believe, or you figure out that the game is you get your grades if you figure out the paradigm of the teacher. And you make sense of Plato according to his beliefs. You read this impossible work by Kant that's written in this ancient language that is indecipherable in his own unique way of speaking that it's almost impossible to make sense of. How do you make sense of it according to the teacher's way of thinking? But this is what makes philosophy different from the way fake philosophy is taught. We learn the paradigm in real philosophy. By what? Reading, not believing. We start by trusting in Socrates, only insofar as it gives us what we need to read. Read the words that are there. Interpretation is missing out words that are there or adding in words that aren't. We're exercising ourselves to see the truth by exercising ourselves not to interpret. And we're learning what understanding is. We're learning about the logos, we're learning about the structure, the paradigm, the dialectic. And we recognize, hey, we're not talking about physical things. We're talking about the cause of physical things and the purpose that physical things seek. Being. We're following the logos. And Socrates gives us clues that he watches the logos unfold. Even if he's the one speaking. The logos is from self, leading us back to self. Which is a puzzle. What is the self? And how does it relate to being? We've got a bunch of puzzles already. What is truth? What is reality? Because that very much relates to being. But then even seeing that opens up questions. What's the cause of being? What is it that knows being? And that's part of philosophy. Not giving answers, but developing questions. Developing our own hypotheses. Developing answers, sure, but discovering questions. This is important. This is dianoia. Self-logos with the paradigm. And so, every now and again, we get some person in the chat who says, why don't we read this book by this European philosopher that I dedicated my 4 years of university to reading his work? Why? Why spend 4 years learning something if you don't know whether or not it's going to be true? Going to be true. If you have no reason to trust that it is the truth. Why this opinion among many opinions? Does he claim to be speaking the truth? Is there a method for understanding it yourself and verifying it? And again, just like when the questions are, what do you believe about the soul? Or what do you believe about this or that? My answer is always the same. Not interested in belief here. It's a different game. So too, what about reading this book? Well, let's first have the model of what's healthy. Before we start looking at the various types of sicknesses, let's first understand the healthy body. So we have a paradigm, a way to hang all the spaghetti noodles or the SpaghettiOs, a way of making sense of it, a way of hanging all the coats. I'm just throwing coats at a person. Here is a bunch of different opinions. You end up with a big pile of coats, a mess. If you have a coat hanger, if you have the paradigm, then you have a way of organizing and understanding and seeing. That's philosophy. And of course, that's also the reason why we have to be doing the work on our shadow, our problems, and the ladder. Because the better we understand philosophy, the better we understand the truth, the better we have a way of seeing its shadow reflected in our problems. So everything you see and learn about the evolution, our spiritual, personal, philosophical development, you'll see a shadow version in our problem. The thing that you're supposed to hold on to is being. There'll be an equivalent. There'll be an appearance of being, someone who convinced you of the false logos. If being is the cause of logos, the shadow of it, the reflection of it, someone who appeared to be beautiful and just and good, will be the cause of the pathologos. There's a voice of the daemon communicating to you to help guide you on that ladder. There'll be a louder voice of the the negative daemon, your inner critic, putting the self down in various ways that cause us to have the problems that we have. So we have to be doing both, because as we climb the ladder up, we'll hit a block. We have to also be reflecting on the nature of those blocks. Likewise too, the more we want to understand and free ourselves, get the clarity, the purification from our problems, the better our understanding of the truth, the better we can do that. The better our understanding of the dialectic, the better we can employ it in our reflections. I just finished a thesis on the music that I've been studying. And in studying music, I came to that conclusion myself. That the things that I'm learning in music theory have an analogical representation in the logos and in philosophical midwifery, removing problems. Not only that, by looking at my own, by reflecting on my meaningful experiences, that's the game, whether it's the reflecting on the text or reflecting on the nature of your own personal meaningful experiences and the difficulties that come up, I recognized that there was a certain theme, symmetry. I noticed the certain elements of the dialectic manifesting in the problems that I had during my course of learning music. I also recognized that if I didn't address them, I would get stuck. I could go no further. I recognized the same thing of all of my classmates. And they all reacted in different ways, but in another sense, in the same way. Different ways in that they might react differently to their problem. They might yell at someone else. They might try and sabotage the entire class. They might try and take over like a dictator. They might try to personally abuse people. They might call their girlfriend and yell at her before a big performance. They might drink a lot of beer between classes. They might take a lot of other drugs before performances. But the thing that was common is they did not have a way of solving the problem. So they either would fail, or they would set lesser goals, or they'd find ways of like using alcohol or yelling at people to try and get through. But if they were able to get through and play at a certain level of a performance, then as is art, as is philosophy, you have to keep going. You seek excellence. You want to play at a bigger stage. You want to play at a bigger venue. You want to play more original songs than cover songs. So you have to keep going. So hey, drinking a few beers before a performance might work here. It might not work on the bigger stage. And of course, we have famously within music, we have the 27 Club, I think it's called. People who tried to use drugs and alcohol as that method of temporarily escaping their problems eventually caught up with them. So you either give up, set lesser goals, find a way of coping that eventually causes greater problems, or you reflect on your problems in a certain kind of way where you can notice themes, common elements, patterns that manifest in music theory, music performance, music collaboration, booking gigs, all these different areas you start to recognize sameness. That's division, the division step of the dialectic. A common theme emerging, symmetry, analogy, meaning there must be a causal thing higher, more archetypally higher, more principally higher, more metaphysically higher, that must be causing. If the same thing happens here, 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 and here, there must be something up that has a scope over those things that's causing that. That's our movement from division into synthesis. Synthesize a common thing and analyze it back to the original problem. So this is a progression to the cause of our problems. And of course, once we've identified the cause, there needs to be some way of understanding it relative to the paradigm of what's true and healthy. Of course, in music, you can recognize all of these elements in music itself. Repetition, themes, the same theme in the verse and the chorus, or verse 1 and verse 2, or themes repeating through an album, leading to a more archetypal causal theme, causal principle of the album. Even in music theory, doesn't matter what scale you're playing, the octave is present in whatever type of scale or mode you're using, pretty much. Therefore, the octave, the relationship between the root note and the octave, is a principle that extends over the many. So the thesis was, if you want to master music, necessarily you must be looking for, in whatever musical theory or performance thing that you're learning, look for its equivalent within solving problems. You have to. It's just, if you want to master it. Not only that, if it's the same archetypal principle that we understand now as the dialectic, then not only can you be mastering music and applying that mastery to solving problems, you can also apply it to the ladder up. You can learn more about the human quest to know the self and reach our highest destiny by learning music. Or whatever your art happens to be. If it's an understandable art that follows an hierarchical ordering, then it's most likely following the same paradigm, in which case you're not just learning art, you're learning philosophy. Not only that, everything you learn in one, you might not have seen it in the other two. Solving problems, the shadow, music as the mean, or whatever your art is, and the logos as the ideal. You might notice something in here that you haven't noticed in here. Oh, that can unlock something. Abduction. Not only is this something that is for music and all arts, it's something in the text we're reading. We notice that Socrates will lay out an analogy, say, oh, by the way, this is like this. Now we're going to talk about something over here, and if there is a similar structure, you need to do the work of finding out what's its analogical equivalent in the other system. If being alive and being dead is like being awake and being asleep, if I establish there's a common system, I'm going to start talking about something over here. You have to find the equivalent over here. We've seen that with the virtues. If there are certain virtues, and I say, oh, by the way, instead of talking about courage, I'm going to talk about virility. Instead of talking about wisdom, I'm going to talk about being. I'm going to stop there. We realized, oh, hang on a second. Parallel systems, there are 4 virtues. He's given us 2. That's enough to establish a pattern. We need to fill out the next 2. And if we don't, we'll miss the puzzle. Because he says that there's a transformation of the virtues that you won't get unless you do this. You have to figure out these are analogical systems, so you can do something called abduction, philosophical abduction. So you can discover the question and solve it. So that was the thesis that I came to in ending my study in music. That if you're studying music, necessarily you should also be studying philosophy, because music follows the same paradigm as philosophy. So your study in one will help the other. Not only that, you can make music more meaningful, because you're not just learning about a relationship within music, you're also learning about a relationship within the soul. And that's what we're here for. Not only that, if there is a paradigm in music, there must be a cause. So if you truly want to master music, you have to start looking at the causes of that paradigm. Because how else will you figure out what you haven't yet seen? Therefore, like all things in learning, if you seek excellence and mastery, you're pushed to the level of being. This not only makes music meaningful, and we said this is why you remember things. You only remember, it's not the spaghetti poured on a pile. You can't remember how many of the alphabet spaghetti, how many A's and B's there were. But if something's personally meaningful to you, then you'll remember it. So you make music more personally meaningful for you, which helps you remember, makes music more significant, helps you move towards your purpose, but it's also necessary for mastering music, because philosophy is the higher expression of the paradigm that music reflects. Not only that, it's reflected into solving problems, purification, and we've talked about why it's necessary to do that as well. So whatever you're learning, you should be doing philosophy and philosophical midwifery, or the dialectical ladder up and its shadow, as well as the thing you're learning. And I used the musical language to express that, to show, and I used the dialectical structure to organize my thinking, so that anyone who reads it will have read it and say, oh, I see how that's a logical necessity for all learning of music to necessarily involve Platonic philosophy and philosophical midwifery, or destiny and escaping fate. But there's also a beauty in that as well, which were the 2 things that our friends have been using in this text to change their mind. And in the text he said, by the way, it's not sufficient unless it does. If it's not sufficient, we go back and we try again. That's where we are in the text. Simmias has said, oh, I'm not sufficiently convinced that the soul exists after the body dies. But he was sufficiently convinced, he did find the argument sufficient, that all learning is remembering what we once knew before we were alive. He said, oh, there's a certain necessity of that, and a beauty in that logos that's shown me that it must be so. So this is the conclusion of the dialectic in understanding, which itself should be practiced because it's the doorway into confirming what that hypothesis, confirming that understanding you now have. Noose. So, Socrates has been pointing out, oh, by the way, this thing of being is beyond belief and opinion. And we can also add to that what we just saw today. Not only, so it's like the poor people who vote conservative, and if, the ones who are, and they're obviously the ones who try and display their faith most prominently. Because belief doesn't have a feeling, they have to make a way of displaying it. They'll paint their trucks with American flags or something like that. Or they'll draw a swastika on their head or something like that. You have to have a way of demonstrating a hope. Because hope doesn't actually have knowledge. There is no experience to confirm your hope as there is with understanding. So you have to make one. Argue with non-believers. Go to war and kill people. Paint your truck in the American flag. Go to a protest against genocide and yell. Go to a Black Lives Matter thing and start attacking black people. There has to be a way of engaging in some feeling to substitute for knowledge. And of course, that'd be a confusing thing because you're confusing being attacked as, oh, this is an indication that you're a knower. People hate you. Ah, I see. No, it's not real knowledge. So it's a shadow. But not only that, Socrates is pointing out all learning leads to this if you do it with integrity, with mastery. So what I outlined in my thesis of music applies to all learning. That's why he said we start in the physical senses. And if there are three parts of the soul, the big part, desiring things, you can become a marketer or a businessman or a finance bro seeking money. The next part, the outward moving that seeks fame or honor, that could motivate. I want to be famous. I want to be well liked by the world. I want to be a famous politician. I want to be a famous social influencer. But the third part of the soul, the reasoning part, what does that seek learning? The sorts of people motivated by that smallest part of the soul become philomathesis, lovers of learning. And as I showed in my music thesis, you'll eventually realize, oh, to really master this thing I want to learn, I have to look at what the nature of being is. The causes of the paradigm of the healthy tree frog. What is that paradigm? And even to learn it, my own blocks will come up. So I'll necessarily have to look at not just the archetypal paradigm, but its reflection reflected in my psyche to cause my problems. I need to look at the shadow of the dialectic to allow me to continue on my learning journey. So this is called dianoia. Socrates in the Phaedo is saying, so that's the purification and the perfection, escaping the chains of fate and finding our destiny. Dianoia, the self-logos, using the structure or paradigm of the dialectic directed towards being. So, people who say, what do you believe? Not only will they never get there, like a poor person, doesn't matter how hard he votes for the rich people to get richer, he's going to be worse off. Doesn't matter how hard he tries, it's specifically against his interest. He can't get there. You can't get wealth equality, which you need to raise poverty for the majority. To raise the majority out of poverty. You can't get that by voting for more money for the mega rich. Same thing with belief. You can't get what you really, really want and need. You can't get what benefits you through belief. Doesn't matter how hard you pray or hope, or how much money you give to the pastor or to your politician. Belief doesn't get you there. Not only that, it prevents the thing that does get you there, because what gets you there? Lover of learning. What stops you from learning? Belief. Professors professing the faith, whether it's the pulpit or the lecture theater, doesn't matter. or the Parliament House, doesn't matter. Can't happen through belief. Why? Because lover of learning involves what? Reading for yourself. You have to read the text as it is. You're practicing seeing without interpreting, but reading gives you the puzzles. You can't solve the puzzle of the movie without watching the movie. You can't solve the puzzles in philosophy to awaken your highest sense of being, state of consciousness, understanding, without reading the book. That's why in this podcast we read the book. We're not interested in opinions. I don't really do interviews. Maybe I will. Maybe I shouldn't be saying I'll never do interviews, because it can be fun to relate it to humans. But specifically, almost all of these podcasts so far I've been reading the text. Why? Because learning involves information you need to get from reading. And that information, specifically that pertains to being, has a name called self-logos, the selfers. Okay, and you can't stop with just information. You have to, like we've been saying, you can't just, here's a bunch of spaghetti, alphabet spaghetti. You have to organize it in a structure, a paradigm. That's the dialectic. And where do we learn the dialectic? In the book itself too. Socrates is talking again and again, giving us clues. He's using the dialectic. He's referring to it. In his Yoga of the Soul, he gave us hints to point to the dialectic as being the actual spiritual yoga. The real spiritual method of separating the soul from the body. That's not a one-off. That will benefit you in this life and the next, and can help you to escape the cycles of reincarnation downwards or stagnantly, so you can reincarnate upwards. Many are the staff bearers, but the only actual inspired mystics are those who practice philosophy correctly. And so the exercise of philosophy is something called the dianoia through the dialectic. So by reading, you get the information, the self-logos, you get a fun pattern to use, the dialectic, so you can organize it, you can do your own dialectics, you can play the game, and you are directed towards being. We've seen in the text 4 parts of the text so far: Socrates' doctrine, Simmias' questions about the immortality of the soul, the question about whether or not the soul, CB's question about the immortality of the soul, Simmias' question about learning is remembering, and the question about whether or not the soul dissipates upon death, if it floats away to the wind. Every one of those have been about being. In order to understand soul, in order to understand philosophy, in order to understand learning, in order to understand the soul's movement out of the body, you have to understand being. So we're getting the 3 big things in learning. In self-logos information, the dialectic, directed towards being. All of it's in the text. That's the game. This is the true video game. You like leveling up your character in a video game? This is the game we play to level up the soul, the noblest game, the only real game in town. And we take all of those 3, we can call it dianoia. So if someone says, what do you believe about this or that? We'll say, oh, no, wrong question. What is dianoia about that? And then we can pull out the text and read it together. Or I can use the dialectic to draw the self-logos out of them. As we've seen in that part of the text, all learning is asking questions and judging answers in an artful way that draws it out. Even Simmias knew that. So have a dialectic with your friend, draw out the self-logos, recognize that all of these words point to being, learning. Oh, and by the way, you keep doing that, you've transformed from a lover of learning, dianoia, to a lover of wisdom. Because the virtue of wisdom is doing this at all times and using it for that planning part of your soul. Plan your activities. Oh, you desire things that are good for you? Well, use wisdom to figure out what's good. You want to do activities in the world? You're going to just do what people tell you because you believe, oh, go play football. Go do MMA. Because those are the beliefs from other people that tell you that is what's good. Go make money. Become famous. Or are you going to use the virtue of wisdom, which is the dianoia, as you're planning? Because the most good thing that you should seek is philosophy. The best activity you can do to reach on real truth that you want fame or honor for, well, truth is in being. The good is in being. The union with the good can only happen non-physically in the realm of the soul, in being, the hyparxis of the soul. Therefore, when you recognize this, everything you do will be towards philosophy. That's wisdom. Using self-logos dianoia directed towards being, or self-logos dialectic directed towards being, or all three together dianoia, using that in your planning. Now, what's interesting about dianoia, it purifies you to make you most like being, until the divine self invites you into that state. That's noesis. That's knowledge. Now you're there, you're at the banquet, you can look around, and you've got logos, you've got dianoia in your back pocket, so you can make sense of things that, hey, there are some yogas or spiritual traditions or drugs that might give you that experience. A Taoist has their enlightenment experience, the same thing, brilliant light of pure being. But without the dianoia in their back pocket, they might not recognize it. They might not make sense of it. They might not know the significance of how to use it in their planning. Without the dialectic, how can they benefit others? They might not know how to go into it deeper. Use the dialectic while you're in being, Taoist. Same thing with Buddhist nirvana. So now we're seeing why Socrates is saying this is the real mystical tradition. But you don't have any of that if you stay at belief or hope. You're not reading the text if you believe somebody else's interpretation of the text. Therefore, you don't have what you need to do what? Find the self-logos terms yourself. You get the buzzwords that they use. Family, hope. By the way, they're going to be buzzwords to do with your prejudices or the pathologos. Family values, in-cave good bad, America first. This is what fascists use. They're not the self-logos terms, it's reflection, the vice version. Your color skin is better, your religion is better, inside your cave is the best cave. Outside cave scary. Oh, fear the brown people. Fear the heathens. Fear you thinking for yourself. Boo. So you don't get to read, you don't get from reading, what do you get? The self-logos terms, and to discover the dialectic paradigm or structure. If you just believe what everyone else is telling you, you're not playing the game. You stay at level 0. So not only is belief against your own interests, doesn't matter how hard you vote for the rich, you're not going to get less poor. It's against your interest. That's propaganda. But you're cutting yourself off at the knees because belief stops you from learning for yourself. And lover of learning, philomathesis, turns into lover of wisdom when you realize that all learning necessarily requires wisdom. That is, being the paradigm up, so that you can use whatever you're learning, music or tree frogs, use that learning meaningfully, really have what you need to complete your learning, but also the shadow of wisdom is the cause of your problems. So you don't drink yourself to death trying to overcome your blocks in whatever you're trying to learn. So you become a lover of philosophy, a lover of wisdom, philosophy, philosophia. But belief will stop that. Belief stunts your development. Necessarily. And of course, this dianoia or virtue of wisdom that you use for your planning. By the way, we have to get into the Republic soon to look at these virtues. We keep talking about them because it's necessary in the Phaedo. So we're seeing how even the texts weave together. So we might take a break soon and jump into the Republic. soon to look at these virtues. But Socrates says, by the way, you trade your virtues in for the ultimate virtue, phronesis. So lover of learning, where we start. Then we realize there's a metaphysical dimension necessarily by our understanding, and maybe you're lucky enough to have an experience as well. So you go from learning to philosophy, and then philosophy when you actually have the experience with dianoia in your back pocket and the practice so you can apply it to your virtues and make it yours, phronesis. That's the kind of learning that we have to take with us into the next life. That's going to change our incarnations. And anything else is going to nail our soul to the body, causing our problems and our worse incarnation. Come back as a bee or a donkey. That's what Socrates' arguments are showing. And there's a kind of justice. To there being a consequence from how you nurture your soul. We have time to learn. You don't start wise. Of course, that's what prejudice is, to believe that you always knew everything. How did you learn that? Oh, I just knew it myself. The school of life, the school of hard knocks taught me what I know. Bullshit. That's not philosophy. That's just experiences confirming your teaching that you got when you were a baby. That's prejudice. I know, I'm right because I punish those who are different than me. Yeah, that's usually the standard of tyrants. You're cosplaying a guru. A guru is Socrates, someone who actually has knowledge. How does he use it? Always to benefit his friends. He's not punishing his friends. He's not yelling at his friends. He's using the dialectic to draw out the logos, bring them along together to understanding of being, and that can open the doorway to their own knowledge and the mastery so they can pass on the teaching. Now, what do people do when they can't do any of those things? They yell, they give you they flip you off in traffic. They threaten you with a gun. Believe me or else. Believe. Hit you with a stick. Punish you for not agreeing. There's no benefit in that. You don't make a horse better by hitting a horse with a stick. You don't make a human better by hitting them with a stick either. How do you make them better? That's what we're learning. Philosophy. Dianoia. And how often do you do it? All the time. That's wisdom. Use that in your planning. Desiring that temperance. Holding on to that as the truth, even though ups and downs happen in life. Courage. Using it for your planning wisdom. Functioning with it like Socrates, there's justice. You trade all of those in for this phronesis thing. That's what we're really after, because we want to enter the club. Socrates say, I'm going to the club. Are you going to join me? We're like, yep. We're going to keep reading this until we have it. Keep practicing looking for self-logos terms. Keep discovering questions. Keep developing our hypothesis. Keep applying the dialectic, making our own. Mythologizing our dialectic. Keep doing that, because that's dianoia and that's purification. That's the gateway up to nous. And so Socrates gave us 4 opportunities, his doctrine. And then his friends like, well, what about the soul? Is that immortal? Let's talk about that. Did the same thing. Talked about being through the dialectic with the self-logos terms, giving us what we need for dianoia, which is a purification to being or nous, with the virtues that makes us phronesis. That's our task. That's the true spiritual mystical experience. That's the initiation. And that's what we need to take with us to our afterlife. And before we die even, to go to the club. Separate the soul from the body. What about learning? Did it for the learning. Same thing. Same thing. Notice, it's all the same thing, which means you can do it at all times. And then was the next one? Does the soul dissipate? Same thing. And so, now we can prophesize. If we've noticed there's a pattern, the thing about a paradigm of pattern is you can predict. If you know the paradigm of how weather is formed, you can predict the weather. not actual prophecy, but close. Socrates says he has actual prophecy, which indicates he's probably been initiated, which is why he's not fearing his death and he knows he's done his work. So he can prophesize like a swan prophesizes, but we can have the next best thing and use our understanding, our dianoia, to prophesize that, hey, 4 objections or 4 parts of the text, his doctrine and 3 objections. The next objection, I bet he's going to do the same thing. He's going to ask us questions. He's going to use his art to draw out self-logos terms through the structure of the dialectic. And it's going to be about being, while doing that same thing, while answering the specific objection. That's our prophecy. Going into this next reading. Now, the challenge or the puzzle where the person was stuck was, will you say that the soul is not composite, so it can't flitter away, it's not made up of parts, and therefore it's more divine? Whereas the body, of course, is made up of pieces and can decay. Therefore, the soul will last longer than the body. But what about harmony? You don't see that either, just like you don't see being. It's more divine than a wooden instrument. Balloons. It's not composite, it's not made up of pieces. But harmony is the first thing to go when your guitar starts to go out of tune. And your guitar breaks down last. It's going to take a long time for your guitar or lyre to break and decompose, but harmony is the first thing to go. So maybe the soul is the first thing to go. Is the soul like harmony? Because his argument before was the soul is like being. Divine, you can't see it with the eyes, but it's there. Not composite. You can also apply that to harmony. Socrates said, okay, let's get, that's your objection, Simmias. Let's take Cebes too. So he's asking for a double team. So far he's been playing one-on-one. Well, first of all, he was playing by himself. Then he played one-on-one with Simmias and then Cebes and then Simmias. And now he's saying double team me, guys. That'll give time for the logos to unfold. So this trust in the logos unfolding is not belief, because what you're trusting in is dianoia, understanding, and nous from self, beneficial, artful, or providential. Not just hope, but it's also not from him in a higher kind of a sense. He said, hey, taking on the double team is going to give the time for the logos to unfold. That's where we are. Let's pick it up from there and let's keep reading. Exciting, right? What's the double team going to be like? And what's the logos going to unfold? And is our prophecy going to be right? Oh, so many interesting questions on the table. Let's go. Okay, so I've changed hats, but we're in the text now. Let's see. Let's see what happens with this double team. First, I'm going to turn down my brightness on my monitor. All right. Okay, just as our body is stretched and held together, so too is the strings of a guitar or a lyre. That's this instrument. So is the soul like harmony? Well, does anyone else want to have a go? If anyone is more resourceful than I, why not answer him? So, using sports. I know not everybody here who's interested in philosophy likes the sports ball, but sometimes sports is so simple that it can provide analogies. Of course, The same reason why we like philosophy, we also like sport. We want beauty in the game. We want excellence within the players. We want just calls by the referee. So everything else, when we recognize that everything else leads into philosophy, even sticks point towards being and seek being, we can start to see in every activity the reflection of philosophy. So, and because basketball is more simple, a small, simple expression or diminished reflection or philosophy, we can use it for analogies. Video games, some people here like games, of course. I stream on Twitch, and I like video games too. And also movies, same thing. The more we learn about philosophy, the more we're learning about the paradigm or archetype. The more we'll see it in movies, the more we'll see it in Star Wars, the more we'll see it in video games, the more we'll see it in sport, we'll see it everywhere. Necessarily, that's what a paradigm is. So, help us to see it, help us to play, but of course, we don't want to be one of those people who gain a better understanding of how to play and stay there. Using a better understanding of the archetype to make better movies, that's awesome. That's mythology. Make games reflect the spiritual quest. That would be fantastic. Add VR into that. Oh, even better. Add, what's the word? Immersive elements or, I can't remember the word. Programmers or gamers might know the word. The immersive elements that generate due to the responses of the gamer, like the decisions that you make affect how the environment changes or how the game changes. Balloons. Using those techniques in gaming so that the game responds to your own personal responses, that would be fantastic. Making the game a dialectic, but also what's the word? I can't remember the word. Like, it's used in games that if it recognizes that you're a certain age or you make certain decisions, then it will cater the advertising in the game to you, that kind of thing, based on your decisions. Kind of the way that advertisers on the internet use your data to direct their ads specifically to you. But we can use, so all of these things that are used terribly in capitalism to just brain rot people and manipulate them, we can use it to benefit, because we can populate the gaming world based on our own individual problems. So we can see them more explicitly in the game and address them dialectically to benefit, solve our own individual problems. So that'd be cool. So that's a bit of a side, a bit of a tangent. I'm excited by that because, we all live in the world. We need to make something. Why not make it the best? Why not have excellence? Why not make the best art? So that's why I can use them as analogies sometimes. He's asking for a double team, but also he's asking, hey, does anybody else want to shoot? Simius has handled the logos in a thoughtful way. Oh, and by the way, one of the other ways of playing is he'll throw a lot of negatives, not a thoughtless way. He wants us to play, participate, flip it to the positive. He handled the logos in a thoughtful way. Something as simple as that, but you're still playing. It's an active, the text is dialecting with you. It's asking you to do things. By the way, here's a question. If something is not thoughtless, what would you say it is? Thoughtful. Simple question, but you're involved. That's a very common technique used in dialectic and midwifery. I've seen Dr. Pierre Grimes use that often. So, Simius handled the logos in a thoughtful way. Does anyone else want to take the ball? Or, CBs, you want to double team me? What's troubling you? That's where we're at. get up from here. CB says, I truly say that the Logos appears to me to be still at the same point and open to the same charge as we mentioned before. From the one hand, I do not deny at all that it has been very elegantly, there's our determiner for what should change our mind, and most sufficiently, elegantly and sufficiently demonstrated, there's our dialectic word, demonstrated. Maybe not blue. Maybe I need to find a quicker way of highlighting. That our soul, maybe different color. Green. Demonstrated that our soul also existed before she entered her present form. But on the other hand, if I may say without offending you, it does not appear to follow that our soul still exists somewhere after our death. So his same issue. Before, when he asked a question about, can you slay my childhood fear of death? Like slaying a boogeyman, a fear of the boogeyman. Because I kind of feel like we're like dust in the wind when we die. And that's what's scary about death. It wasn't sufficiently demonstrated. Part of the sufficiency was elegantly, and we also have seen necessary. As qualifies what should change our minds. Sufficiently demonstrated that we existed before our birth, but not yet after. Same issue they had previously. Since on the one hand, I do not agree with the objection of Simmias that the soul is neither stronger nor much more lasting than the body. For she appears to me to be far superior in all these aspects. So he's getting to the nub of Simmias's objection that the soul, that the Simmias thinks the soul isn't stronger or longer lasting. It's like harmony. It's the first thing to fade. Not as strong as an actual body of a lyre or a guitar. But Cebes thinks the soul is stronger and more lasting because she appears to be far more superior in all these respects. Why then, the Logos might say, are you still distrustful? After seeing that the human being dies, the weaker part still exists. Does it not appear to you then that the more lasting part must necessarily be preserved during that time? On this point, please consider the following, whether what I say makes sense. For just as Simmias, I will also need some image. Images help. Metaphors, mythology. For to me it seems like saying the following, just as one would say the same thing after death of an old weaver. So he's creating the myth, he's creating the analogy. That the human being has not perished, but is preserved somewhere. Then the garment which this human self has woven and was still wearing should be offered as a sign that the soul is preserved and not perished. And if anyone will distrust of this same sign, then they should be asked whether the human genus is longer lasting than a garment which is in use and being worn. Then if someone answers that the human genus lasts much longer, then they must believe that it has been proven that accordingly that, that which is indeed human is definitely even more preserved, since the less permanent thing has indeed not perished. Okay, let's unjumble that word salad. Okay. Logos might ask, are you distrustful that seeing after the human being dies, the weaker part still exists? Okay. See, that's Simius's argument. He thinks that the soul is superior. The more lasting part must be preserved. So he thinks the more lasting part must be preserved. So let's highlight that. So he's using then the death of an old weaver as his analogy. The human being has not perished, but is preserved somewhere. Then the garment, which she'd woven and still wearing, should be offered as a sign that the soul is preserved and not perished. They should be asked whether the human genus is longer lasting than the garment which is in use, is being worn. If someone answers that the human genus lasts much longer, then they must believe it has been proven. That which is indeed human is definitely even more preserved. Than the sweater, the less permanent thing. But Simius, I do not believe. Okay. So you've got a old weaver who's woven a sweater. If the sweater is still alive, then she is probably still alive too. Because the human genus, the human species, is more permanent than a sweater. But I do not believe it's the case, Simius, and you must also consider what I say, for anyone could assume that the man who said this was talking nonsense. No wonder we're having trouble understanding. It's nonsense. For if the weaver had thus worn out many garments and had woven these garments, on the other hand, he still perished later after wearing many of them. But prior to the last argument, even if on this account, oh my goodness. Okay, this is terrible grammar. I am going to, at least for me, I am going to pull up a different translation that might not be as accurate, but will be worded differently, and maybe that will read better. And then we'll jump into the Balboa translation. So only because I'm struggling a bit here. 87a. Here we go. So let's pull that up. Okay. Pulling it up. Firefox. There we go. Let's read the lobe. For I do not deny it has been very cleverly, and if I may say so, conclusively. So conclusively he's using for sufficiently. That's cool. Shown that the soul existed before it entered into this bodily form. But it does not seem to me proved that it will still exist when we are dead. For I do not agree with Simius' objection that the soul is not stronger and more lasting than the body. For I think it is far superior in such respects. Why then? The argument might say. Notice, keyword, logos. Literally, the keyword, self-logos. Argument. It's not there. This is why the Balboa is so important. Because we need to get the certain keywords that we call self-logos. The structure, dialectic, directed towards being. And one of those keywords is logos. It's not there. Argument. But it can help us because, like we're doing here, it sort of reads more fluidly than the literal translation of the Greek. So we need both. But mostly I'm in the Balboa, of course. Why then, the argument might say, do you still disbelieve when you see that after a man dies, the weaker part still exists? Do you not think the stronger part must necessarily be preserved during the same length of time? Now see if my reply to this has any sense. Okay, so he's saying, look, I think the soul is not weaker like Simius does. Thinking harmony is weaker than the wood of a guitar. But I still think that it's going to not last as long as the body. So when our body dies, our soul is lost. But he's saying, but someone will say, hang on a second, what? Shouldn't you say that the stronger must be preserved? So he says, and this would be my reply to the logos that might ask that question. What would I say to that? Well, like Simius, I'm going to best express it in a figure. It seems to me that it is much as if one should say, it seems to me that it is much as if one should say about an old weaver who has died, that the man has not perished, but was safe and sound somewhere, and should offer proof of this the fact that the cloak which the man had woven and used to wear is still whole and not perished. Hey, is Bill still around? Oh, he is. Look, his coat's on the coat hanger. We're talking about coat hangers early, coincidentally enough. Then if anyone did not believe him, he would ask, which lasts longer, a man or a cloak that is in use and wear? And when the answer was given that a man lasts longer, hey, is Bill around? Well, he might be. His coat's on the hook at the front door. What's going to last longer, Bill or his coat? Without a doubt, the man must be safe. Okay, if his coat's there, he's probably somewhere in the house. Because that which was less lasting has not perished. Because a man's going to outlive his clothes, obviously. He needs to replace his, before he dies, he's going to have many different cloaks. But I do not think he is right, actually, Simius, and I ask you especially to notice what I say. Anyone can understand that if someone answered in that way, they're talking nonsense. For the weaver in question wove and wore out many such cloaks, and lasted longer than they, so that's all right. Though there were many but perished, I suppose, before, here's the rub, before the last one. Yet a man is not feebler or weaker than a cloak on that account at all. And I think the same figure should apply to the soul and the body. Hey, just because his last cloak outlived him doesn't make him weaker and more feeble than a cloak. The same figure should apply to the soul and the body. And it would be quite appropriate to say in like manner about them, that the soul lasts a long time, but the body lasts a shorter time and is weaker. And one might go on to say that each soul wears out many bodies, especially if the man lives many years. For the body is constantly changing and being destroyed while the man lives. Live a long time. Hey, you look very different than when you were a baby. Even then they knew that with cells in our body are changing. We outlived many of our physical forms. Even back then they could tell that a baby is much smaller than a 6-foot adult. For the body is constantly changing and being destroyed while the man still lives. And the soul is always weaving anew that which wears it out. And when the soul perishes, it must necessarily have on its last garment. You're going to be wearing something when you die. And this only will survive it. And when the soul has perished, then the body will at once show its natural weakness and will quickly disappear and decay. And so we are not yet justified in feeling sure on the strength of this argument. So your body, the last form your body's in, will outlive the soul. But of course it's weaker than the soul, which is my disagreement with my buddy Simius. So it'll show its natural weakness and quickly disappear and decay. And so we are not yet justified in feeling sure on the strength of this argument. That just because something is naturally weaker, it's going to last less. It's not going to last as long. Because your last cloak is weaker than your body or the person, and that's going to outlast you. Just like your last body, it's going to stick around for longer, even though you've had many bodies and it's naturally more weaker and feeble than your soul. So we're not yet justified in feeling sure on the strength of this argument that our souls will exist somewhere after we are dead. For if one were to grant even more to a man who uses your argument, Socrates, and allow not only that our souls existed before we were born, but also that there is nothing to prevent them from continuing to exist and from being born and dying again many times after we are dead, because the soul is naturally so strong that, hey, not only repeated clothes or repeated forms of this one body, but can endure repeated births, even if they granted you this extra, Socrates, even allowing this, one might not grant that it does not suffer by its many births, and does not finally perish altogether in one of its deaths. Even if we grant reincarnation. So he's not necessarily granting reincarnation. There are many clothes like many kinds of your single body. But hey, Socrates said necessarily there must be reincarnation. That was one of his 3 arguments of the immortality of the soul. Cyclical, because we would end up asleep. We'd all end up dead like Enderman. Number 2, we have to get our resources from somewhere. Okay, that's not necessarily reincarnation, but we had to come from non-physical. But also back and forth of opposites. That's the kind of logos of the natural world. So therefore, if there's an awake and asleep going back and forth, there's a living and dead back and forth. So therefore, 2 of those 3 arguments necessitate reincarnation. And he's saying, hey, even if we allow this reincarnation, what about your last death? Because, man, we suffer so much in our lives that our soul may endure repeated births and suffer because of it, but finally perish in one of the deaths. But he might say that no one knows beforehand the particular death and the particular dissolution of the body, which brings destruction to the soul. for none of us can perceive that. Now, if this is the case, anyone who feels confident about death has a foolish confidence, unless he can show that the soul is altogether immortal and imperishable. Otherwise, a man who is about to die must always fear that his soul will perish utterly in the impending dissolution of the body. Either the way I feel it can, that even if the soul is stronger than the body, the final form of the body can outlive the soul, like the final cloak you're wearing. And even for those who believe in reincarnation, not me, but those other people, there's no way of knowing if this is your last reincarnation. So therefore, you're foolish to be confident. Unless it is altogether immortal and imperishable. Otherwise, you must always fear that your soul will perish utterly in the impending dissolution of the body. So let's read this in the Balboa so we can highlight some things. So, the death of a weaver, that if the garment that you were wearing, that should be a sign that your soul is still around. And if anyone should distrust the same sign, they should be asked whether the human genus is longer lasting than a cloak, a garment. And then if someone answers the human genus lasts longer, then they must believe that it's been proven that it's preserved, since the less permanent thing, your coat, has not perished. But I don't believe that it has to be the case, since you must also consider what I say. For anybody could assume that the man who said this is talking nonsense. For if you've woven out many garments, and woven those garments, you still perished after wearing many of them prior to the last garment. Even if on this account a human being is not more inferior nor weaker than a garment. Prior to the last garment. So this idea of inferior or weaker than a garment. The soul is not weaker or inferior than the body, but it can still be outlived by its last body form. I think the image must show the same relationship of the soul to the body, and anyone saying the same things about selves would appear to me to be talking within measure. That, on the one hand, the soul lasts longer, while on the other hand, the body is weaker and less permanent. For thus they might say that the soul wears out many bodies, especially if the soul lives many years. For if the body is in a state of flux, it should perish while the human was still alive, since the soul is constantly weaving anew that which wears out. On the one hand, it would be necessary that at the time when the soul does perish, self would happen to be wearing the last garment or body. And only this would survive being destroyed. Wearing the last garment or body. At the same time, the soul is destroyed. This is his fear. The body has already shown its weakness of its nature by quickly decaying and disappearing. So still weaker, like I think. And that's why it's going to decay in a few weeks or whatever, and not a lifetime. So that this your logos is in no way worthy of being confidently trusted, which says that when we die, our soul continues to exist somewhere. For if we were to come to an agreement with someone saying that which thou says, and even more, who does not only allow that self exists for our souls in the time even before we were born, I dropped my guitar pick that I'm fiddling with as I read. Since when we die, there is nothing to hinder some souls to continue to exist and be born, and thus be born again, born and die often. For in this way, the self-nature of soul, that's a cool expression, highlight it, the self-nature of soul. I don't know if that's going to be a good term, but I recognize self-nature. That sounds pretty kick-ass. So that could be a key term in the text. Also, it could be a selfer term, self-nature. Literally, the word self means it's honorific, so it could be a selfer term, or it could be a key term of the text. We've been talking today about what we do in understanding and reading is look for key terms, arrange it dialectically, point it towards being. So that's why I highlighted it there, even though without knowing if it's going to be relevant yet. Kind of like prophecy. Don't yet know, but I'm prophesizing that it might be. Because I can, not actual prophecy, but the closest in the physical world, understanding. Like predicting the weather kind of prophecy. So in this way, the self-nature of soul is so strong to be able to survive many births. Thus, he allows these former concessions, whereas they no longer agree that the self must not suffer by her many births. So there's a kind of suffering of the self in her many births. Okay, so a lot of negatives. They no longer agree that the self does not. So let's ignore the nots and say self suffers by her many births and is finally altogether destroyed in a certain one of her deaths. But this particular death and particular dissolution of the body, which brings out the final destruction. Whoa. Final destruction. To the soul, no one can know. He might say, for it is impossible for us to perceive that at all. Then, of course, very common. Like, it might turn out that when you can see all of eternity, you can look back at your lifetimes and you can say, oh, I've got 5 more reincarnations or something. I don't know. But at least commonly, most people are only used to perceiving through their physical senses. There are more lovers of riches than there are lovers of honors, and there are more lovers of honors than there are lovers of learning, and there are more lovers of learning than there are those who upgrade from lovers of learning to lovers of wisdom, being philosophers. And of course, there are fewer philosophers than there are philophronesis. Those who have reached there with dianoia and the virtues, develop that learning that is eternal and immortal and can last with you and is necessary to complete your work and go up to the next level, meet Socrates there and have a ball with him, join that conversation with better men and gods. Therefore, most people, because of how few the philophronesis people are, can say, well, there's no way of knowing whether or not this is your last incarnation. It makes sense. It's the kind of conversation you might have with your friends over coffee or at the pub or in the dorm room or the dining hall, the lunchroom. No one can know whether or not this is your last one, even if you do believe in reincarnation. The final destruction. Final destruction. Ominous. To the soul, no one can know, he might say, for it is impossible for us to perceive that at all. then if this happens to be the case, anyone feeling confident about facing death does not confide intelligently. They're dum-dums. Unless they can prove the soul to be altogether deathless and indestructible. Make sense? Good argument, mate. But if they cannot and are about to die, they must be in, constant fear. That doesn't sound great. Come on, 2 thumbs down. What does that mean? No, 2 thumbs down. That means sad rain. Constant fear for the soul of self. And this present argument, separation from the body will be her, and this present separation from the body will be her complete destruction. So this is his fear. Constant fear for the soul of self. And of course, that this present will be her, present separation will be complete destruction. And so this is interesting because we can relate to this guy. Some of us believe in reincarnation, but again, we talked about belief isn't good enough. It doesn't get you there. Doesn't really slay our fear with belief. We need something better. We need to understand it necessarily must be the case, and elegantly said, sufficiently convinced. Not only that, it'd be great if we could also experience it and verify through knowing, noesis. Belief ain't good enough. So even for those of us who kind of believe in reincarnation, and even those who don't, that seems to be the big fear about death, right? We fear for the soul of ourselves. We're going to lose our essence, what makes us us. We don't want to lose ourselves. We don't want this to be our last. Even if in reincarnation, we might even be afraid it might be our last reincarnation. So he's speaking for himself and his particular family, cultural, religious views, but also kind of speaks for all of us. If we can't know, you could even take it down a level. Hey, you can't know that there's reincarnation. So of course we're always going to be in constant fear of dying. Even if Simius thinks that the body is stronger than the soul, the way that the guitar body is stronger than harmony. So I get where he's coming from. So of course the soul is going to die first before the stronger body. But even me, who thinks the soul is stronger, it still might be outlived by the last cloak. The body's going to perish quickly because it's not as strong as the soul, but the last form of the body says 2. Simius thinking the body's stronger. CB's thinking that the soul is stronger, but is still outlived by the last cloak, the last body form. And then there's a third one that doesn't seem to be in, but even those who believe in reincarnation, maybe this is your last, because you can't prove that your soul or yourself doesn't suffer by the many births. Hey, there's so much injustice in the world. We haven't yet awakened philosophy to have the paradigm to be able to recognize and address justice and injustice. Hopefully we are, and we're going to share it with the world and just with our friends or teachers or in our mythology, in everything we do, because we are doing our best to develop our own virtues for our own soul's journey, our own soul's betterment, for our own incarnation, and that could have a beneficial byproduct to the world. But until that happens, there's a lot of suffering in the world. So couldn't that wear out our soul? So for that third class who thinks that there is reincarnation, you can't know if it's your last reincarnation. So whether you're in one of those 3 categories, you think the body is stronger, the physical world is most real. So you have materialists who think the material world is real. They have a friend from our last stream talked about oh goodness, I forget what it's called. I should have made a note on it. He gave us a very good word. We did a emergentism. The body is most real and the soul kind of like emerges as a byproduct, an artifact of the physical world. So there's that camp. There's the camp of people that think, well, yeah, the soul is stronger and more real, but you can't outlive the last cloak. And then there is a camp of people who do believe in reincarnation, but have no way of knowing, apparently, whether or not this is your last reincarnation. So we are in constant fear. So this is the fear of death. We want courage. We talked about the vice of courage, to accept death while still being afraid of it because you fear worse things. Maybe further suffering if you don't die. But real courage requires the logos dialectic and towards being, requires dianoia for it to be a virtue. So you wouldn't fear death if you have an understanding that necessarily being is this and that. The soul has the same hypoxis. We know, we understand where we're going. So we want to slay this fear of death. So he's speaking for all of us, and he's given us 3 camps that we could be in. And he said the only way that you can actually not be in constant fear of your own physical death, constant fear of the soul being destroyed, the reason we fear death, is if you can prove that the soul has to be necessarily altogether, not just for this lifetime, deathless and indestructible. Deathless and indestructible. These are the conditions he's setting out for Socrates. Here's my reasoning. Here are the camps that you could be in. For all of these people, you have to show the soul is altogether deathless and indestructible. So he's gone from double teaming Socrates by adding in this extra class of people who believe in reincarnation but don't know if their last one is their last reincarnation, and therefore he's triple teaming. Socrates is being triple teamed.
What in the heck are we talking about here?
Triple teamed.
What?
Triple teamed. So, let's see what Phaedo says. Phaedo's the narrator, by the way. He was there and he's narrating it to our friend. Our friend. Socrates wants to know, hey, were you present with Socrates on that day, Phaedo, when he drank the poison? I was there myself. Was self. First word is self from Socrates. First word from Phaedo, self. There's a puzzle. Is that significant? It has to be significant. Because Plato's not a dope. All right, so Socrates is asking the question. Phaedo is our narrator. Back down to here. Phaedo says, then upon hearing what selves had said, we were all thoroughly distressed. Oh my goodness. He's freaking everybody out. So they just said, oh, we didn't want to freak you out on your last day, Socrates. And he gave, hey, I'm like a swan. I'm singing my final song. I'm happy about where I'm going. Come on, guys. You've known me for a while. I'm a philosopher. What do philosophy people do? They go there often. I'm going to where I've gone before. Practice the art of death and dying. So don't worry about me. I'm singing my swan song. But his friends are freaked out. Thoroughly distressed. As we told each other afterwards, they might have been kept it quiet. But oh man, you freaked me the hell out, CVs, when you told us that we should be a constant fear. Oh my goodness. That this last separation from the body could be the complete destruction of my soul. Oh my goodness. For having been quite convinced by the previous logos, they seem to confuse us again and throw us into distrust. So trust is important. Repeating the doctrine is important. But if you just have trust, you can be knocked off your game. been freaked out. They were thoroughly convinced, but now they're confused and they're thrown into distrust. Distrust of what? Throw us into distrust. Wow, that's fantastic. Such a good illustration of what we've been talking about today. Of not only the logos that had been said before, but also of what was going to be said later on. That either we were quite worthless as judges, or that the realities were unworthy of trust. Wow. 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 A lot going on there. They're thrown into distrust of what? They distrust the logos because they were convinced by the logos. But not only the logos, but what's going to be said later. Because we distrusting themselves, because we were worthless as judges. So if I was convinced by something that I now have seen as nonsense, not only is the logos that convinced me bad, but I'm bad. Or the realities are unworthy of trust. Now this is significant because we've been operating from a kind of premise. A hypothesis, let's say. Here, we've been saying, okay, today we've been talking about how if you're learning music or anything, there has to be a kind of paradigm. Oops, I gotta open this thing so I can move my pen to the right screen. I gotta open this. Oh, everything's gone crazy now. There we go. So, now I can close it. So, learning. Oh, goodness. Learning requires a paradigm. That means that if we want to learn, let's say, music, we're learning the paradigm of music. There's some sort of list of terms. There's some sort of order along a hierarchy. But if that paradigm is universal, there must be its higher expression in philosophy towards our destiny. Using the self logos terms. And the ordering or the dialectic order and directed towards being. But of course, that has its shadow. Which doesn't go up. That has the shadow of the self logos terms. So it has the patho logos, the sick logos, and but follows a similar order. So the shadow dialectic, or the negative towards not being but ignorance, leading us to our failure or problems. So that has been our thesis today. And if we want to learn if we want music to be meaningful, we want to apply everything we learn about this to philosophy to make it meaningful, because it's meaningful when it relates to, let's write it down, self, meaning. Meaningful when we can use it to relate to self or destiny. Also, it's necessary that we apply to our blocks in block letters, so we can continue our learning and not get stuck. And so we can call that escaping fate. Because every time you need to perform on stage, you have to drink. You can say, well, I know where this kid's going. If he gets better at music, he's just going to keep drinking and drinking, and his fate is he will die of alcoholism just like his father. Escape fate. So it's fate. It's like a train track. See, notice that this is a ladder and this is a train tracks. So we talked about using images of cloaks and things to our reasoning. We can say we have our ladder, which is a ladder up. Of course, there are levels of states of mind and understanding as you go up, states of being. And of course, towards the top, there are enlightenment experiences, and you can recognize Taoism and Buddhism and Hinduism and all this isms up there, because they have their own levels of experience of being. Ladder versus train tracks. Why? Because our fate are like train tracks, and we are stuck on the tracks, or we're stuck in this speeding train leading to our failures. That's what fate is. You know how it's going to end. It's harder to see our own because that's the nature of problems, but that's what fate is. So we have to make it meaningful, relate it to ourself or our destiny, but also we necessarily have to apply whatever we learn to our blocks. And because learning is a paradigm, we can do that. Because if it's this would be a dialectic on if learning is, or let's say is a universal, this is our thesis. If learning is a universal paradigm. Of course, when we say universal, we can use the same words we're getting from the text about being. What do we say in the text? Bring it up. Deathless, indestructible. And let's go back further and all the other things we've said about being. We've got lots and lots and lots. Hopefully you've been making a list as we go. These beings are pure, uniform, clear and real. Maybe not clear, that's a puzzle, but real. Scrolling up. What else do we have? Divine, deathless. Uniform, indissoluble. Always abiding according to same in the same way. Deathless, intelligible. So all of those adjectives we apply to the word being, and the shortcut for the word being is the word, where were we in the text? Is the word back. How far away? The shortcut for being, which has all those words in our dialectic of being we've been developing, is the word if the paradigm, the word is, if it is means being. Of course, there's a different kind of is in the first hypothesis, but we'll leave that for now. If the paradigm is, then it's a universal paradigm. That's what universal paradigm means. If the paradigm is, meaning that whatever you're learning, music, geometry, math, painting, writing, you will notice there are certain terms you have to use. You have to, let's take writing, you have to start with an introduction. You have to give a synopsis or demonstration, or in your thesis, you have to do a excerpt or something like that. And then you have to divide it up into its parts. Then you have to come to a conclusion or a synthesis, analysis, and so on and so on. So that's the order and hierarchy. There's certain key terms you have to use. Music, key terms, octave, perfect fifth, harmony, rhythm, melody, certain order or hierarchy of those, following a pattern. Of course, this implies there's a kind of a goal at the top, which is a curious puzzle. What's the goal of music? But if that is the same paradigm, you'll find similar analogically related terms within philosophy. Deathless, immortal, pure, being, all the ones we just said are relating to being, beauty, justice, self-logos terms. The order is a dialectic. Of course, this is the paradigm, but it also exists within philosophy. Not only that, we have to not only apply it to the ladder, but the train tracks, the shadow of the dialectic with the pathologos self-terms, the particular idiosyncratic language. Hey, you notice that your friend, before when he drinks, he always calls himself an idiot? Ah, you idiot, and he has a beer. You don't have to call yourself an idiot. Maybe he calls himself a stupid head. Certain idiosyncratic or a kind of personal logos, not the truly personal logos, but the kind of particular logos to his family. Everyone in his family calls him a stupid head. When he drinks, he calls himself a stupid head. When he has to get on stage, no one's going to listen to me because I'm a stupid head. This is his own individual pathologos, the idiosyncratic particular language that will lead him, if he keeps calling himself stupid head, if he keeps calling himself an idiot, he'll keep on drinking, he'll keep becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, leading to his failures or problems. That's why everybody knows that Bill will just drink himself to death, thinking he's not good enough because he's a stupid head. That's his fate. It's train tracks. He's stuck there. His dad did that. His granddad did it. His uncle did it. It's the family curse, we call it in mythology. And if you want to master music, you might be able to climb the first few rungs until you start calling yourself stupid head, start getting on the booze. You have to be doing this, necessarily, if it's a complete and just course in music. And of course, in the last couple of years doing music, studying it formally, I've seen everybody go through it. To a man, everybody. Myself included. And of course, there are some that take the challenge to do this. Few, but some. Did my best to encourage it. And there are some who even do this. Try and find the analogical equivalents. Actually, more tend to do this than do this, by the way. I don't know if that's a principle, but some people enjoyed saying, oh, really? I notice when I'm doing band stuff, interpersonal relationships with people is a kind of harmonizing of the elements. Oh, when I harmonize musicians might recognize this. If I play an add 2 in a chord, which means the chord usually has 3 notes, the root, a third, a fifth. If I play that second, it's too close to that root note, which is the bassiest note. Bass, and it kind of makes it muddy and bleh. But if I take that second and move it to a different hierarchical order in the next octave, same note, but not the second in order, but the fourth in order, and add 9 instead of an add 2, same note, same pitch, well, not same pitch, but same note, but different hierarchical order, that's a very, very pretty chord. So also, that's a order and hierarchy of the terms. Of course, you have to learn the terms. You have to know what I mean when I say second and nine. Not hard, just take some time and interest. But you realize, oh, there's a hierarchy and order, what makes it beautiful. Some people realize the same thing in a band situation. This guy, if he's the second in command, really rubs against the band leader. It's a word for it too. I don't know, the master of the band or something like that. There's a word, band leader. Let's say band leader. They clash. But if he is not second in line, but there's a 1, 2, 3, is the fourth in line. Maybe he's the electric guitarist, the lead guitarist, and we have the singer or the rhythm and the beat, and then he adds some stuff on the top, or he is the fourth person to add his input, then he really, really, really contributes well. He makes the whole band more beautiful. Exact same principle, paradigm applied to human relationships as music theory. Band performance and band and music theory. Now, very short step from realizing it applies to personalities to applying it to yourself. Are there certain ideas within your soul, within your thinking, that have to be arranged in a certain order that are very, very good? Let's take the soul. Hey, your desires. What if your desires rule your soul? Upside down snowman. Or what if you still have desires, but it's down here? Look at it setting a base. Look how good it is. In its right order. You still desire, but the band leader is your reasoning. So what you're desiring is what the band leader says should go. What does our reasoning want? What does our reasoning love? Learning. Below methesis. What do we really actually upgrade to when we really love learning? What do we discover we're actually interested in? Wisdom. Being. Not learning about tree frogs, not even learning about music. Ultimately, we really want. This leads into being. We become a lover of learning, of music, to a lover of wisdom, philosopher. We should be guided not by our desires to make money or our wanting to be famous, but learning. What are we? Where are we going? What should we be doing here? What is good? Is being rich good, or is there something greater? So, this is what would happen if learning involves a universal paradigm. That would mean everything you learn, you should be making it meaningful by relating it to philosophy. By the way, if you realize that it is, you might have a discovery here, but you might be only here in philosophy. But you can find, oh, by the way, there must be an equivalent here. You can make a jump, gain a new insight. Or if you're blocked here, you might gain an insight here that takes you past your block. You find the analogical equivalent in the order that you aren't familiar with. What's that? That's analogy. That's what we've been doing today. It's like a cloak. It's hard to see this ladder, the soul and the body, but let's look at a cloak maker, a weaver, and his cloak. That will take us past the block we're at and help us gain an understanding over there. That's what analogy does. That's what abduction is. Abduction is when a teacher sets out, by the way, there is an equivalence here. I'm going to give you these 4 here. I'm only going to give you 2. 2 is enough for a pattern, which means you have to discover that there is a relationship and you have to figure out these ones here. That's abduction. Philosophical abduction, by the way. Not deduction, not induction. Deduction logic, the logically deducing from the principles. Induction is like modern science. You look at the physical examples and you induce a theory. Abduction is you have a little bit of both. Now, that's a term I'm coining because I think it fits, and I haven't seen another word for it, and that's why I say philosophical abduction, but it's the same principle. So this is our thesis of today, our hypothesis for today. Now, when we look at these two things that make music meaningful, when we apply it to the higher, we're applying it to the self. We've been talking about also as we go, we've also have another thesis in our back pocket that the self triad, the excellences of the self involve the self logos, that's our dianoia, that's what we're learning, but it applies to self being. The dialectical dianoia or self-logos applies to being. That's what makes philosophy, not just lover of learning. It's the realm of being or truth or mind. Self-being or truth or reality. Another word for that is because the nature of this is ousia or mind. It's the nature of pure mind. And of course, we have the one self that uses or watches the logos, creates the logos, but also watches the logos and experiences the mind. So if this is understanding and knowledge, there's something that has them both together. That gives us our triad of the self. But of course, there's a ladder and you have to look for the train tracks. What's the train tracks? That means that the shadow would be opposition to that. The self or mind or logos sucks. This is the idiosyncratic language that we recognized of Bill over here. Stupid head. His mind is stupid. He's a stupid head. He can't think. He's a dum-dum. He's worthless, so he's just going to be a slave to other people. He's not going to follow his highest goals. That's selfish. He doesn't want to be selfish. He's a little... He's being a slave. He's being a Cinderella, slave to others. So, let's go back into the text and let's see if we can see this here. They were distressed. Oh, and they did not trust the logos. They did not trust themselves because they were worthless as judges. And they did not trust the realities. Triad. They did not trust. This is the significance of developing. So this triads is the significance of the paradigm. If there's a paradigm, you create triads. These are your skill trees that you level up. You look for patterns, you look for order, you look for key terms, right? You look for the key terms, you look for the order, you make them into little patterns, little triads, little triangles, ladders and train tracks. You represent them mythologically. Why? So that when you read that section, oh, they were thrown into distress. Different color, let's go. They were thrown into distress. Which was 88C. Did I spell distress? Yes, D-I-S-T-R-E-S-S-E. They were distressed at 88C. What did they have distress about? They did not trust. No trust. From no trust in the logos. We themselves as judges. Because they were poor judges. And realities. The realities. Notice anything? Look for the patterns. Patterns in the key terms and the order. Oh! Let's look. Oops. Selves. Oh, there's the word self there. Realities. No, this is self-being. Hang on a second. We've been picking up the terms of being in our dialectic. So when we say being, we also bring in our other understanding we've built with us because we've been leveling up through the dialectic. So when we say being, we also said truth. We also said reality. We also said mind. Which means when we're looking for patterns, we can use all of our understanding. So if we just said self-being, we wouldn't recognize this. If we just said mind, we wouldn't recognize it here. But because we have being and mind and truth and reality, we can say, oh, hang on a second, realities, that fits here. This is why we do the dialectic, so you can make new insights and connections. See? So we can recognize reality, oh, that's here. Logos, oh, that's here. Self, oh, that's here. Hang on a second. This is the self triad. The nature of this triple team counter argument is getting them to have no trust in the big three. Our excellences, we are the self. We have pure mind, allowing us for the highest enlightenment and insight and knowing. We use the logos to get there, to make sense of it, and then to go beyond to know the self. The logos is the unfolding of reality and our return. These are the three excellences that we have. Mastery of the logos through philosophy, experience of being making philosophy about being, and a mystical tradition. It's understanding and states of mind. And ultimately you use them both together to reach the nature of the self. And the self state is phronesis and might be tied to this idea of clear, because we still have a question. If this is most real, what is most clear? So that's another question from a few podcasts ago. But they have no trust. So what are they in? They're in the shadow. If they continue to live their life without Socrates there, if all they spoke to was the next best thing, Cebes, his arguments would get them to not trust the logos, not trust the realities, not trust themselves. Those are the big three of the shadow. The self, the mind, the logos sucks, which puts them on the train tracks. Call the path of logos, the shadow of the dialectic, leading us to our problems, our failures, our blocks from learning, our blocks of learning what we love to learn in philomethesis, our blocks of learning what takes us to destiny and philosophy, and causes our fade. We've been talking about the need to awaken philosophy can solve all human problems. This is why. You can look at Russia, you can look at China, you can look at evangelism, you can look at capitalism and realize it's a train tracks to failure. Oh, really? We're blowing up the environment? Billionaires are now multi-billionaires? People who are 30 cannot afford a house? They are significantly worse off than their parents like 50 years ago? No crap. Anyone who could see it because it's fate. It's the train tracks. It's obvious to anyone who wants to look. That's why it's a train tracks. That's why it's fate. That's why this model gives us what we need to recognize our problems, make it obvious to us, and apply the learning and philosophy, philomethesis, philophronesis, to solve the problems, purify ourselves, perfect us in this, leading to phronesis, a kind of learning and virtue that purifies and perfects in this life and the next. And because of that, we can recognize it even in these characters in the book. So we get people come in, hey, why not read Heidegger? Why not read Kant? This is why. Unless we first know the paradigm, we won't know where is Hegel's problem, where is Kant's problem. We won't be able to diagnose. That's why this should be taught in day one at all schools. This is philosophy. Hegel's is not philosophy. It's an opinion, specifically, definitionally. Without the paradigm, we won't be able to recognize how far he's at, where are you at, and where are you stuck. This is why Platonic philosophy isn't one philosophy among many, it's the philosophy, the word the. Now, in a similar way, when we read this, we were distressed about the logos, about ourselves, about the reality, so we can recognize using the paradigm. Remember, if there is a paradigm, and if the paradigm exists in all those ways we describe existence, reality, they don't trust reality, so maybe they don't think paradigm exists. They don't trust the logos, so they don't trust their ability to get there. And they don't apply it to selves, so they don't go beyond the paradigm of one to apply it to all. Everything, the one self. But because we're not stuck, we can recognize that even these dudes 2,000 years ago, we can recognize, oh, yeah, I understand what you're saying. You don't trust these three things. And if Socrates isn't there to help you, we know where your life's headed. Here. You're stuck on the train tracks of fate. And if we were convinced by Socrates that our soul must be immortal and engaged in reincarnation, and there being an end to reincarnation, a purpose to life, and a higher order of incarnation, and then Simmias and Cebes come along, they've learnt a lot from Socrates. Of course, they're not at his level, but they've learned enough to provide a good argument that can throw us into confusion and distrust. If we're the sort of people who think the body is stronger, we're a emergentism, or we're a materialist, or we're a physicalist, we think the physical is more real than the soul, or we think, yeah, well, the soul's more real, but it can't outlast the body. Or even if we do believe in reincarnation, but we don't know if we have a final reincarnation, if we're in any of these camps, we could keep our fear. And if we had been convinced by Socrates prior, not like that there is a immortality of the soul, we could not trust, we could maybe throw ourselves into our pathologos, into our shadow, into our problems, into our fate, into the train tracks, tie ourselves to the train or the tracks or something. Because, I was a bad judge before, I suck. Reasoning sucks because I was lied to, or my reasoning led me down the wrong way. So logos doesn't exist, it's stupid. It's an illusion. It doesn't exist. And the realities, they're a con too. So these are the stakes for his triple team. So his last day, not just the people there, we talked about how few are the people who love learning over honor and riches. And how few among the lovers of learning are those who actually realize what they want is philosophy. And those people interested in philosophy are few at Socrates' last day. There's only 13 of them. All 13 of the remaining philosophers were thrown into their problem. That could have been Socrates' legacy. The 13 of few philosophers remaining in Athens could be really messed up because of just Simmias and Cebes being honest and using their understanding to argue well. Those are the stakes. Imagine if that was how it ended. Imagine if that was the end of the book. The conclusion was the few philosophers ended up distrusting the logos reality in themselves. The very things that we recognize are the highest and most excellent. And hey, we talk about debate versus dialectic in philosophy compared to all other apparent philosophies that are marketed, is we are trying not to win or put people down or hate or criticize. We are to encourage people to see themselves, to see reality, and to see reasoning as noble and divine. The best and highest and most important game in town. All of us are philosophers. We just don't know it yet. We need to awaken it. The three things that we are to see is highest and excellent and most noble and divine. They are left thinking there's a reason not to trust them. I don't trust myself. I don't trust my own mind or reality. And I don't trust my ability, my words, my reasoning, my thinking. Imagine if the text ended there. What could that have done for human history? This is Socrates. He's helping us 2,000 years later. It's giving us what we need to awaken philosophy and save humanity and save ourselves. And understand why we are saving ourselves. Not through hope, through these three. Of course, whatever we learn is a kind of mean applying to both. So those are the stakes. On his last day, he invited the triple team, by the way. The few remaining philosophers are in this kind of approach, in this kind of state of mind, this kind of way of thinking. What's going to happen? What's Socrates going to say? Or what's the logos, the self, going to say? By the way, he said it was like Socrates was watching the logos that the self had said. Socrates is watching the whole thing. So whether it's Socrates, whether it's the gods and reality, or whether it's the self, what's the logos going to be? The stakes are immense. The 13 remaining philosophers in Socrates' company. Oh, there's Euvenos, who isn't there, and Plato wasn't there either. But apart from those, the 13 remaining philosophers at Socrates' side. Don't trust the logos, reality, or self. That's the big three. What's that going to happen? Is that his legacy? He just gave his doctrine. He just showed the soul to be immortal through his reasoning. Learning is remembering, and the soul is incompetent and can last after our death. But now all of those things not only have been disproven apparently in their minds, but by thinking them first and then hearing CB's argument proves that they couldn't trust, because they learned this through the logos. So they can't trust the logos. They were learning about being and realities the whole time, can't trust this. And they thought they were judging themselves because they were developing their understanding. They were using the dialectic. So these four great things he just did caused the greatest problem. What a disaster. That's his legacy? That's his life? How's that going to affect human history? How's that going to affect us wanting to save humanity today and be a good person today and have virtue today and help ourselves and know ourselves and be the best we can be, live the best life and have the best death? If this is how the text ends, what's going to happen? On that bombshell and on that teaser for next week, I'm going to say goodbye, and I hope that's enough of a teaser to get you interested, to get you puzzled, to get you concerned, to see the stakes, to also illuminate why we've been doing this the whole time. This is the byproduct of our learning together. We can see the stakes. We can get into the movie. We can play the game. We can level up ourselves. So I hope that was a cool trailer for next time, teaser for next time. I hope you're engaged. I hope you're interested. I hope you're curious. I hope you get puzzled. Join the Twitch if you want to watch live and chat. Like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Join our Discord if you want to chat there. Share your work. And hopefully soon we'll have a Patreon for those wanting to do dream analysis and also get copies of the board. Maybe have access to the audio versions of the podcast, and also maybe have watch-alongs of other philosophers. Maybe watch Pierre Grimes' works or other interesting or notable voices in philosophy on YouTube. There's a lot of options. kind of just playing it by ear as we go to see what people want and what is the best way of sustaining this channel, keeping it alive. So, on that note, I hope to see you next time. Thank you for joining me.